Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. I hope this episode helps you thrive in life and leadership. And if you like it, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll never miss a thing. Well, if you're like me, you're always looking for ways to stay informed and engaged with the world around us. And that's why I created On the Rise. It's a curated weekly newsletter packed with thought-provoking articles and insights on faith, culture, and the future of the church, and really any other subject that I find fascinating and conversation worthy. And I send it to you absolutely free every single week. So if you're ready to join the conversation and be part of a community of curious, engaged leaders, you can subscribe to On the Rise today at ontherisenewsletter.com. You can start and stop at any point on ontherisenewsletter.com. This episode is also presented by Glue. Glue is connecting the faith ecosystem in innovative ways. One way is by making it a lot easier for churches to connect with new visitors. Did you know, for example, that the time it takes for a church to respond to new visitors has a major impact on whether that new person or family will stay? Well, with Glue, you can use automation to build engaging new visitor engagement journeys. You can learn how at get.glue.us/visitors. That's get.glue.us/visitors. And now to today's episode. Dr. Lomenick, welcome back to the podcast.
It's great to be here. How many, is this 3 for me maybe?
Oh gosh, no. You've been on with roundtables, probably 5 or 6.
I still want to be in the top 5 of your return
you're
guest.
You're definitely, you're in the top 5, maybe the top 3.
I'm honored. I'm honored to be. Listen,
well,
anytime I get an email inviting me on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, I have that moment again when I feel like, okay, I've arrived. Like I've finally made it. I finally got to the big time.
Well, I'm so glad to have conversations with you because I think you have your finger on the pulse of the church business landscape like few other people. Anytime people are like, hey, do you know so-and-so? I'm like, no, but Brad does. No, but Brad does. Brad does. And then I'm inevitably texting you or emailing you going, hey man, can you introduce X to Y? Or what do you think about this? Or what do you know about, you're just the most connected man in the world. You really are.
Well, Carey, as we discussed, I think the last time I was on the pod, I still feel like that needs to be my next book of some sort. And I haven't done any work since then.
I was going to say, which you're never going to write. The book you're never going to write, right?
It's like, how do you connect with people? How do you, it's sort of the updated version of how to win friends and influence people. Mm-hmm. I just need my publisher, my agent, and a writer to hold my feet to the fire.
Wow. But how many years are you past due on your contract now for book 2?
6 years.
6 years.
Sorry, Harper Leadership.
So is this why you're in hiding right now and under a witness protection program?
I'm incognito. Listen, I'm not moving the needle. I'm not moving the needle on the P&L at Harper Leadership. So they're not sitting around thinking, I wish Lomenick would finally get his book turned in.
Well, that is not a conversation. Leadership has done well. It has sold a couple of copies.
It has done well, and it continues to do well. So you know this, the beauty of books is nobody cares when it came out, except for the publisher and the author. Mm-hmm. So I still get people who tell me 7 years later now, I just saw your brand new book, H3.
And you're like,
great.
Sure you did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because it's new to them. I mean, if it's new to them, I'm very happy that they're finding it. So that's one of those books that I think will be, again, lifetime for me. It'll keep selling. People will find it, and especially younger leaders. That's who I wrote it for. So,
well, and every year there's younger leaders leaving college, heading into internships, heading into leadership, and the whole deal. And that's a beautiful segue. Do you see how smooth that was?
That was so good. You're such a pro at this, man. Come on.
So smooth, so slick.
600 episodes in, I think, right?
Yeah, we're getting really close if we're not there already. It's a lot of fun and no end in sight too. I mean, believe it or not, there's a couple of other people to be interviewed. Brad, did you know that?
Well, listen, I you know this. I'm your greatest fan of when you bring on such a variety of people. I mean, the Will Guidara.
Oh, that was amazing. Wasn't Will great?
Oh, and I'd listened to Danny Meyer on, I think, Tim Ferriss's show. Mm-hmm. And just those kind of voices that you having access to them, that then you start to be able to be this translator for Christians, for pastors, for church leaders, for just Christian leaders in general, business professionals. But the connection point of you being able to unpack stuff with somebody like Will, that's just it's so helpful and it's so valuable to me as a leader. So thank you for continuing to stretch the envelope and not just going back to the tried and true voices that are lined up and you could always have on.
Well, we do have a few perennial favorites too. And, that's like Brad Lomenick, et cetera. But I mean, it was you who introduced me to Adam Grant. I remember that email. And Adam's coming back on the pod this fall. And I think you introduced me to Kevin Kelly, right?
Yes.
The most interesting man in the world who's on the pod this year. Like such a great interview with him and dozens of others as well. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, the Simon Sinek's and Adam
it was
Grant's
Simon Sinek. Yeah, it was Simon too. Because people think I know all these people. It's just, no, I know people who know all these people. And then sometimes you get to know people like Seth Godin. I think that was a cold call to Seth. And he got back to me. And at first, he was busy, he couldn't help. And then I just sent him an email once a year or so. And then he got back to me and said, yeah, I'll come on your podcast. I'll endorse your book. And we become kind of friends, which is awesome. Which is fun. That's the crazy thing. You miss all the shots you don't take, right?
Well, the connections, that's again, power. There's currency. There's so much currency in who but it's not just who Carey. Like it's who that actually knows you and likes you. Like when you reach out to them, they want to respond to you. They don't want to just avoid you.
Yeah, people. Seth responds almost instantly, which always blows me away. He says if he has one kryptonite, it's that he loves his email a little too much, he would say. But this is part of what I wanted to drill down on today. So for those of you, a lot of you know Brad. For those of you who don't, Brad is one of the most connected people in the world, in America, particularly in the church space, but also in the business space. CEOs, leaders, politicians, athletes, like you just know everybody. And, for a lot of young leaders who are trying to figure out, well, how do I do that? How do I get a mentor? What does that look like? I want to go into, back to the segue, the making of Brad Lomenick. And yeah. I want to look at like early, because you keep your personal life pretty close to your chest. And that's fine. But to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, tell us about young Brad, where you grew up. It was Oklahoma, right? And a little bit more about the shaping of. What were some moments? Like when was the first time you thought, gosh, I could be a leader? Or, you had those things, or some of your early childhood ambitions. Take us back to that first decade or two of your life.
Well, I remember a couple of things that stand out. I think I was 3 or 4 years old, and one of my grandfathers, he, in passing, he sort of said, hey, you're the kind of kid that's going to be president someday.
Wow.
And I remember that. I remember that, like, sort of this sense of encouragement, but also a passing statement of identity shaping fuel. And I didn't, the first part of that of being president. Okay, well, is that really possible? Probably not. But this idea that I could be something, and there was something he was seeing in me that was now going to connect to the ability to have influence or play at the highest level. That's one thing. And by the way, all the grandparents listening, you have the ability to speak such sense of encouragement and inject like huge amounts of courage into your grandkids. So the second thing was when I first got to first grade, Carey. The first day of first grade, Mrs. Weaver's class. Shout out, Mrs. Weaver, in small town Oklahoma. And there was probably 25 kids in the class. And by the end of the day, I knew all the kids' names. By the second day, I was figuring out connections between all the kids in the class.
Wow.
And I didn't even, again, nobody told me to do this, but in essence, like, starting to see patterns of, oh, well, Joey, loves to be on the playground and be in charge. So if I'm going to get on the right team for freeze tag, I better make sure that, I've got Joey in my back pocket. And Cindy, she loves to do trade deals at lunch in the cafeteria. So I know if I want to, make a trade deal happen at lunchtime. Isn't that crazy?
That is insane, man. I mean, wow, because that's exactly what you do today.
It's exactly what I do today. And it showed up so early in my intrinsic God-given wiring. And I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know I was doing it. It was just natural. Like it was my default. And nobody said, "Hey, listen, Lomenick, when you get to first grade, here's 3 steps for better, for a better experience in Mrs. Weaver's class." But that was the asset I traded from the very beginning of my my interactions socially as a young kid. And it always was true. I would run for, all the class sort of elected offices, whether it was class president or, the club president or captain of the sports team. All that stuff, I think, showed influence. To your question of when did it first show up? I think it first showed up for me when I became a captain of the sports team, probably in middle school, because elementary, you're still trying to navigate. Well, what does that mean as a captain? But once you get to middle school, it sort of starts to mean something. And there was just always in me this desire to connect. Another, just to your question, another thing that stood out for me, it's probably a sophomore in high school, but I served on this sort of advisory council for the city, small town, 5,000 people, but we were getting together with the local sort of city council, business leaders, the mayor, and talking about issues in our community. And here I am, a sophomore, being invited to sort of be part of that group. And again, I'm out kicking my coverage at that point in terms of what the things I should be part of. But it was always this sense of I'm gonna get connected to people because I'm already like showing up intentionally and figuring out connections. And I think if the other things I probably could have done in life, investment banker, investment bankers are really good at this. Like they know to connect dollars typically with opportunities. There's the agent world, which is you connect athletes or entertainers to different deals. But I feel like what I've gotten to do in the last 25 years is really on point with that power, this superpower for me of being not just, as you said, connected, but being a connector. And it's just always been true. Anywhere I go. I mean, in college, Carey, I was in a fraternity at University of Oklahoma. I was one of the few students on campus who was in a fraternity that had some leadership within the confines of the university sort of framework. And I could walk into almost any other fraternity on campus and have friends there. So, there were fights that would happen between like my house, my fraternity house, and some other rival house on campus. That the dumb things we did as fraternity kids, fraternity students. But I could walk into that other rival house and sort of be this peacemaker or the deal maker between, hey, let's call a truce. Because I had connections and friendships there. I was there. I crossed over a lot of different, I would say, lines that weren't typically crossed over. So, if I ever get to be on a cabinet member, by the way, in somebody's administration, I think I want to be Secretary of State.
Because you're brokering all this power from around the world, all these different interests. Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's what the Secretary of State does, in essence, is they they create influence and friendship and equity with people around the world that then they can appropriately trade when needed.
Would you ever be interested in politics in the future?
No, not really. I mean, I really was interested in high school and college and post-college. I mean, that was what I was planning to do. And then, showed up on a guest ranch and started riding horses, and then met a few other people that connected me into the leadership space. But I'm still fascinated by the world of politics. I don't know if it's the best place for me to have influence because so much of politics is downstream.
It's funny. I don't know that you've ever stayed there when you're in Toronto, but do you know the Royal York Hotel?
I've never stayed there. But
yeah.
Yes.
So we were there on the weekend. My wife and I went to a concert, stayed overnight. But I was telling her, brought back all these memories because when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, I was involved politically. And I would go to, that's a pretty young age for cabinet ministers at the provincial level, state level, to be pulling, state senator. Anyway, office joke. But long story short, pulling me into meetings, asking my opinion on policy and legislation and strategy for winning leadership campaigns and elections and that kind of thing. And I left it behind in my early 20s because I kind of saw what it was really all about, that there were some good people in politics, but it was a lot of, and it's funny because some of the people I worked with when we were all 18, 19 years old are now the hacks in the news, and I've lost touch with them decades ago. But walking back into that space at the Royal York, I'm like, oh yeah, I used to come here when I was 18, 19, 20, and just sitting in back rooms with politicians trying to cook up how to win. And fascinating world.
I think the other thing about politics, which is true, and I don't know if it, if I would have ever really ever honed my skills in that space, is it's so public. There's such a public perception. There's so much PR. There's so much just public relations, and I like this. I like the wielding of my influence to be much more private. I like it to be behind the scenes, sort of stage right or backstage or side stage. And that's just hard to do. It's harder to do in a public space like politics compared to, what I've done so far.
You're very discreet. And I think the through line here for leaders is one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, Brad, is I think a lot of us have really unique giftings. It's like, oh yeah, I really enjoy this. I love connecting people. I love thinking through issues, but we get slotted into a job. And maybe that job is an accountant, maybe it's an executive pastor, maybe it's senior pastor, maybe it's a lawyer, maybe it's a plumber. I don't know, whatever it happens to be. We get slotted into a role, and 90% of what makes us unique never gets tapped into. And I wonder if, you brought more of who you really are and what you're capable of to the job description you have. Number one, I think your value is going to go up. Number two, I think it's going to be a lot more interesting because I thought I left politics behind, but I didn't leave the things that I brought to that table. Did I really know what I was doing at 18 or 19? Probably not. But there were adults in the room who thought I brought some level of value. But now I get to exercise that in new space. And the thing about you is you have one of those job descriptions that's impossible to describe. Right, yeah. You're the founder of Blank, which is Brad,
which
Lomenick,
means nothing.
Inc., which means nothing.
Means nothing,
right? And what does your company do? You connect people. So the partners on our podcast, the sponsor reads, are usually 9 times out of 10 people that you have connected me with. And I'm super picky about who gets on the podcast and the whole deal. And you and I have lots of conversations about that. Yeah, we'll do this, but we won't do this. And what about this? And what about that? But, you do that, and you do that for multiple organizations, but it's also 100 times more complex than that as well. So, basically you've been able to craft a job that plays into your personality that goes back to Mrs. Weaver's class. What you were doing there, you're doing now, and doing it like on a supersized version of that.
Yes.
Any thoughts about what a traditional career or job description, how limiting that could be, and what to do to bring your whole self to it?
Well, you're definitely hitting on this premise of Do I think about an assignment, which is a job, or do I think about calling, which is much more like the broader expression of the way God's wired you that now gives you multiple outlets for assignment. So, I would say like your calling, Carey, the breadcrumbs of your calling are you're a great conversationalist. You're really curious. You have this propensity to want to learn. You can like make people feel comfortable, which again connects law. It connects writing. It connects podcasting. It connects being a teacher, preacher, communicator. It connects leadership. Same for me. Like, I've had multiple different assignments. Being in the conference space with Catalyst, like working for a management consulting company, obviously working for John Maxwell. The role of being an advisor and a strategic sort of consultant in this season. Even being a head wrangler on a guest ranch. Those were all my ability to let my superpower of connecting actually get expressed and played out. And so the through line for me, and every leader listening, they need to figure out the through line, because that's the thing now that gives you runway for all of these different things you're going to do over the course of your 40 or 50-year career. And that's the challenge with so many younger leaders today. They have so many options. Mm-hmm. There's so many jobs or so many outlets that are available, which makes it even more important to figure out the through line, figure out the thing that's going to connect all these dots. And so to your question, what's my encouragement? I would say, like, if you're young or even old, but especially young, like figure out what that through line is. Figure out the things that are true about you, God-given strengths and wiring, along with passions that have probably been created because of either life moments or friendships or family, a lot of different factors with passions connected to God's story. And if you combine those three worlds, and if we add Jim Collins, his idea of that you can create some sort of economic engine mm-hmm. connected to those, then man, you've got something special. But it's so sad. I mean, you and I both see so many leaders that they might have a great career or a great job, but they're only expressing, as you said, 10% perhaps of what they would consider to be their superpower.
Or sometimes, they end up adopting a persona that they think is going to get them ahead on a platform, on social media or whatever. But yes. It's almost like, okay, I saw that over there, and now I'm going to put that on, and hopefully this gets me to where I want to be. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to really explore your story in more detail is like, no, that wiring was there, like in Mrs. Weaver's class, maybe early. Your grandfather, what do you think he saw in you? Do you have any idea?
Well, I think he saw a natural leader. Now, what that looked like was a kid who was probably a bit more extroverted, a kid who was, like Carey, I learned like the 50 states of the United States when I was 4 years old, and I could recite state and capital.
That's pretty cool.
But I was a learner. Like I just naturally wanted to learn. I mean, I would memorize songs and sing them back to like my family. But here's where that shows up today is like, I've got thousands of names that I can recall of people I've met or, the friends. And then when, to your point, like, Brad, you're so connected and you seem to have this ability to like remember things about people. Well, that goes back to my, sort of the ability to remember states and capitals. And so I think he was seeing that some of those giftings getting lived out. And I was probably a bit more willing to be in front of others and be the entertainer, which I think probably was both natural and it was probably encouraged, mm-hmm. which made it come out a bit more. So there's a number of things there. Again, for me, when I think, okay, what's the practical side of this? The practical side of this for parents and for grandparents, but when you start thinking about your kids, is you have the ability. We tell our kids you could be anything you want to be. I don't know if that's great parenting. I think we now the answer is you probably can today more than ever. But should you? Should you based on the way, if you know the way you're wired, if you're self-aware, if you're so dialed in to the way God has put you together, then should you try to do anything? Or are there certain things we want to encourage our kids to move towards? And that's the hard part is they get to 18 and we tell them, you better make a decision that's gonna ride with you the rest of your life, which, most of us, we never use that ever again. So what I would be encouraging kids in their elementary years, middle school, high school, and college years is, okay, think about the through line. Let's look for breadcrumbs. Let's look for the things that you naturally gravitated towards, regardless of who told you, if there was any motivation around it, if there was any award mechanism that was tied to it. And let's start thinking about those things, and let's try to move you towards those things. And that's a different mindset than the average. Again, I'll just use American. Mm-hmm. The average American parenting school system thing is, I'm going to move these kids or my kids towards something that feels like it's successful, compared to it's moving them towards the things that are wired already in them.
I mean, there is no degree that would be good credentials for what you've ended up doing with your life.
Nothing.
No. There's no undergrad, there's no graduate, there's no master's program in what you're doing. And if you, I spent a lot of time in university, history, law, theology, all of which shaped me and formed me. Law in particular, obviously theology did, but law in particular really kicked my butt. And they shaped who I am, but there's no communication path, and I don't actually have a degree in communication. But that's basically what I do. And that's what I've done my entire life, right? Whether debating club in high school, which I loved and really enjoyed, whether that was radio when I was younger, law, it was the courtroom side, ministry, it was the preaching, vision casting side, and now, I run a communications company. You can get a communications degree, but it doesn't prepare you for this.
Exactly.
Doesn't.
Yeah. And listen, this, I'm very pro education. I'm pro college.
Oh, yeah.
But
we pushed our kids.
Yeah, just we have to give permission and allow for this, for a new generation especially, to be able to have a bit more extended time to say yes to different things, which will give them more experimentation, in essence, of, oh, well, I tried this and it's probably like a 3 out of a 10 to really connect to the way I'm wired. Oh, this thing, no, it was an 8 out of 10. So we're looking for data. We're looking for like seasons of opportunity to then like reverse engineer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Compared to it's just the one thing, and you better go figure it out. You better just do this, and then we get stuck in the one thing, and we make tons of money, perhaps, or we have tons of influence, but yet we're, like you said, we're miserable.
Yeah, tons of money, tons of misery. I've seen that many, many times. Mm-hmm. So, Brad, often, when someone is that kid in Mrs. Weaver's class, they tend to be social climbers. They tend to be the show-off kid. And I'm not saying you were completely mature when you were 7 years old. I'm sure there were elements of that or whatever. But one thing, of the many things people would describe you, I've never heard or thought of the idea that you're a social climber. You're not. You're just a connector. It's like, it's not like you're using your relational ability to build a lot of personal capital. You really default to being genuinely interested in the people that you get to work with. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that characteristic as you've seen it, because we talked before about networkers versus connectors, etc. But talk about even in that experience in Mrs. Weaver's class about the difference between what a climber might do and how you saw your classmates.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the climber still, the social climber or the influence climber or the I'm gonna network my way to the top. There's still this sense that it's about me. And I think when you really do have this premise that the goal of these connections and being a connector is to benefit others, then that's when it's powerful. And people can tell, like the thin line between those two worlds is pretty thin. But I think it comes back to, the for what. And the for what should always be that I'm trying to elevate somebody else. I'm trying to make them successful. And by the way, Mike Foster has this new book out, 7 Primal Questions. So my primal question, which he helped me unpack recently, is, am I successful? So there's this deep desire in me, Carey, that I want to be successful. I want to be seen as successful. I want to be successful. But it's also it's connected to my superpower. I want to help other people be successful. And when I get to help other people be successful, as a connector, as an influence creator, as a change agent, as somebody who's going to bring two people together, and the power is going to be in them actually doing something together. It actually allows for me to do the thing that I'm really deeply, deeply, deeply passionate about doing, which is I want to be successful. So if that makes sense, like I'm actually successful because other people are successful.
Right. And that's a difference with a networker.
Exactly. Because when I'm successful as a networker or a social climber, other people might be successful short term, but long term, probably it's going to be either like neutral or it's going to be negative. And so this is again why it's a bit nuanced. There is a bit of self-serving in regards to the way I see my power of connection, because it still comes back to this is actually making me successful. When I connect two people who are successful, it makes me more successful. It's the same with influence. It's the same with, do you add more power into your circle of trust, or do you lose power when you actually connect two people who are influential? You add power, right? But the social climber, they get power because it's a scarcity mindset. If they get power, they're usually taking it away from somebody else, compared to that I'm getting power because I just added it to somebody else. So I'll stop there because I don't want to nerd out too much on this. But
no, this is super helpful. What is underneath your drive to be successful?
Good question. I don't know, to be honest.
I ask that question to myself on a regular basis. I'm not sure I have a good answer.
Yeah. And there's a, I don't know if it's something in my childhood that sort of triggered that. I don't know if it's something that I'm trying to avoid. But it is, so, the thing that to Mike's book, the thing that would drive somebody like me crazy is failure. So in probably a lot of ways, I am chasing, and this moves towards the unhealthy side of it. Even the years of Catalyst, which I've unpacked with you on your podcast before, of Darb and the dysfunction,
Brad backwards, evil Brad.
Yes, yes, the leader that everybody loved to follow but didn't want to be around because he got stuff done, but he would leave people in the ditch. And I think the underlying sort of kryptonite, or the underlying thing that I was always thinking about, and this has been true in every season, is if I fail at this, man, it's like, if we fail, let me say it differently. If this thing fails, then I'm a failure.
Right.
So those those just incredibly too intense times at Catalyst of driving results. So much of that, when I unpack it, is wow. I was just trying to avoid failure. I was just trying to make sure that I took something and made it a success.
That's a good exegesis, a good thing to look at. So Catalyst became the had to be there conference for next gen leaders. And actually you had a whole bunch of over 40s trying to sneak in too, right? It was a young leader, but there are a whole bunch of old guys and the most plaid shirts I've ever seen per square foot in anywhere in North America back in the day.
Plaid shirts and brand new jeans. Nobody should have been wearing. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, you had it was at its zenith under your leadership, and it grew from a good John Maxwell initiative to, filling an arena with, what was it at its peak? 14,000 people, 10,000 people. It was huge.
Yeah.
You had Seth Godin there. Who else did you have there? I mean, it was my goodness.
Yeah. Simon Sinek and Malcolm Gladwell and Jim Collins and
who was extremely difficult to get, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're wondering.
A lot of the folks that at the time were, like you said, pretty hard to get. But they also were way more willing to say yes to those kind of gatherings when they knew how many leaders were showing up.
Exactly.
Catalyst sort of became the place that if you were launching something new or, you had a message that you wanted to get out there, then it was on the short list of lots of thought leaders and publishers. So we, in the early years, we had to try really hard to get the Seth Godins. But once it sort of got some momentum, it was a little bit easier.
Yeah. When you look at that, and you've written very honestly about that in Catalyst Leader, I think was your first book, where you talk about DARB and getting healthy. And I mean, man, you've lost so much weight since those days too. I mean, I've only kind of spent a lot of time with you since those days. We met about the zenith of Catalyst. When you look back on that, what would you tell your younger self? What did you get wrong as that, connector? Did it start to become a climber? Did it start to become a networker, or what happened to your self? What would you tell yourself now at 30 when that ascent continued?
Well, I would definitely say make sure that you're allowing for the people closest to you to still get the best of you, because that started to not be true. And this is true for many of us. When we start carrying more weight, we typically we still have a lot of, I would say, distance influence with the folks who are partners or speakers, or they still think you're great, and then the people closest to you are like, man,
get him out of the
if
room.
You only knew. Yeah. And I would say I would probably I would make sure that I'm that I'm really clear that this season is not, it's just a season, and my job is to steward it well. But that I'm not the end all be all, and I don't need to put as much pressure as I probably did on myself to make sure this thing's successful. There's a lot of things I would probably say too, Carey.
Did you feel? Keep going, but did you feel that pressure?
Oh yeah, big time. Absolutely. Pressure financially, pressure relationally. I mean, pressure just personally. That, and I'm, I've been very open about this. Like, I was in many ways stepping into something and leading something that I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yes.
And hello, like, how many of us raise your hand out there in podcast world if you've been there? Like, we all have. So that was, the self-aware Brad and the much more healthy Brad would have, I don't know if I would have said that more, but I would have just given myself permission to rest in that and be okay with that, be comfortable with that, compared to, I think the pressure would force me to to almost get toxic with, hey, leave me alone. I know what I'm doing, compared to, I need your help. Please come help me. So that's just the natural kind of thing we do as leaders, is we don't want anybody else to know that we don't know what we're doing. So, and some of that also ties back to, here we are building a leadership movement. Like we're supposed to be in the business of like creating healthy leaders, and I was not necessarily always that. So there's that side of it too, that you don't want to be seen as this fake.
You said there were other things you might tell yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many of us, especially when we're in that season where we start to get invited into things that we probably don't deserve being invited into. I feel like I handled that pretty well, but I would have brought more people along with me. I had the tendency, not because I wanted it to be about me, but I think I just had the tendency to sort of show up on my own, and I would have allowed for more of the team to be part of some of those experiences. And that's a lesson. That's a lesson that I think, John Maxwell, one of the things I learned from John, which I didn't live out real well, but I still learned it, was take people with you. Just in general, like take people with you in life, on trips, into meetings. Always be bringing somebody along, because it's the best way for them to learn, but it's also the best way for you to actually leverage in the healthiest way possible the influence you've been given, is to bring somebody else into that influence who probably doesn't deserve it. And it's one thing to show up on your own; it's another thing to show up and then to watch that person and experience it with them, where they're like, "Oh my gosh, that was like a game changer," to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, I need to take notes on that one myself. So you hinted at meeting people for the first time. So I'm thinking about leaders who want to continue to see their influence grow. And I'm thinking back to times I got into green rooms or behind the scenes and I meet someone who was a hero. And I always feel awkward in those situations. It's like, what do I say? Do I say too much? Or,
by the way, now you are one, Carey. Now people are meeting you. Now they're meeting you and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Carey Nieuwhof. I just got to talk to Carey."
Yeah, I'm not used to that. But I
know,
anyway,
but you are.
On to the next. But what do you do in a situation like that? Like, I think sometimes I either default to saying, "Man, I love your work," or "I loved your book," or blah, 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 or you end up talking about yourself. I did that a lot when I was younger. "Oh, let me tell you about me." And neither, I don't think, is a great introduction to people that you've admired from the past, Brad. I mean, you've been in on 10x, 100x those transactions or encounters that I have. What makes for a healthy conversation when you meet someone that you've always looked up to?
Well, I do. I like that somebody honors with knowing of your work, or at least the more specific and the more honoring you are with specific things. I think that says something. So, if from a strategy side, if somebody's like, "What do I do when I meet Carey Nieuwhof?" And I didn't expect to, and he's in the room, and we're sitting at a dinner table, and we're sitting next to each other, and we've got 30 minutes. I do want to start with an honoring of your work, and that could be simply, "Hey, Carey, love the podcast. It's really been helpful for my leadership journey. In fact, I'll give you three episodes or three conversations for you that you've had in the last couple of years that really were impactful. Your conversation with so and so and so and so and so and so. And here's the things I learned from that." Like, that's honoring in person. It's also honoring in an email. So start there. Start there. Now, you don't want to spend the whole time just fanboying, though, because that gets annoying. I think the second part of your connection, if you're meeting somebody new in that situation that you admire and you look up to, is hey, can I ask you a couple of questions that I've really been wrestling with, and I think you have a lot of expertise on. That's part two. So, honor with specificity, ask specific questions that put that person in the place still of honor, but now they get to be an advisor, a mentor to you, and you're getting free advice. Hello. And everybody loves to give free advice. I don't care who you are. The third thing then I would say is, I don't like when people say, is there anything I can do for you? Because I don't know how to answer that usually.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't know. Just keep doing what you're doing. That's usually what I say. So here's a better thing to say to somebody is, hey, if I could do 3 things for you, here's 3 options. You choose one. So could I write a review on your latest book? Could I invite you to an event that I know somebody needs a speaker for? Or can I take a recent talk of yours and transcribe it for you? Now, I just made those up, but so, like, to me, give somebody something specific that they can respond to, and then maybe 1 out of 3, multiple choice. But the more I make it specific compared to, well, how can I help you, or what can I do for you? That just is not helpful. So those are practically like what I do when I show up and meet somebody that I've never met, that I'm, sort of honored to be in the room with.
Wow. That's like worth repeating. Like, just hit rewind on your podcast and listen to that last 5 minutes, because having been, the recipient of a lot of those conversations, but also in a lot of those conversations, that is a much better framework than fanboying, leaving it awkward, or etc. And I love the fact that you asked permission to ask questions. Hey, if you don't mind, over dinner, I've got 3 things I'm wrestling with. Would you be open to me asking you a few questions? Is much better than question 1, question 2, question 3. And I get it. I've had that many, many times where there's a little deer in the headlights. Particularly in the early days, it's like, I'm actually having a conversation with fill in the blanks, and you're almost surreal on that front, right?
Yeah. And here's the thing, Carey, you know this, and I do too. Like, the best leaders, the GOATs, like the people that you admire the most, they appreciate the honor you give them. But what they really want, what I really want, what you really want, is you really want to have a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's value add.
You don't need to hear the accolades over and over again.
No. I want to ping pong back and forth. I want to actually learn from you. So what happens so many times when I say, can I ask you a few questions, is now, what happens when you ask a few good questions. Now that person you admire is now asking you questions. And now what do we have? We have a conversation, we have connection, and hopefully we have friendship. So I remember, like, so many tables I've sat at, Carey, where that person who I admired had no clue who I was and didn't really care, to be honest. By the end of the dinner, they're saying, can I get your number? Let's stay in touch. Next time you're in, Chicago, why don't you call me and let's get together? Or they're asking me, hey, is there anything you're doing that I could be part of?
Crazy.
And it always flows off of your, like, appropriate, honoring, but intentional curiosity.
And that's how you connect with the A-listers in your industry. And it doesn't start there. Wow. Okay. I want to go back to the Dude Ranch. I don't know. I've been wanting to ask you that question for so long. So you graduate high school, and how do you end up at this horse ranch?
Well, I went there first in college.
Okay, you went there in college. Okay.
Yeah, so I was a fraternity brother, Lance Humphreys, shout out, and Jason Shipman, shout out. Both guys had worked. Actually, a couple of other even fraternity brothers had worked at this place called Lost Valley in Colorado, and I was big in Young Life in college, and I'd worked at a Young Life property the summer before, and they came back from working at Lost Valley, and they said, "Man, amazing experience. You need to go there this next summer." I'm like, great, I'll apply. Well, I applied, and I think there was 30 spots, and I think 300 or 400 people applied for those 30 spots, and I got in, which I felt honored to get in, and fell in love with the place the first summer I was there, and that was when I was in college. And then once I graduated, then I went back there and worked. I was going to work for 6 months and go back to law school. Ended up staying for 5 years, full time. Was the head wrangler, literally and figuratively. I was a cowboy, and had to figure it all out, because as the head wrangler, you have to know what you're doing. And again, there's a theme here, Carey, on my life, which is I've been in seasons where I had no clue. Every season I've walked into has been one where I looked around and thought, man, I hope nobody knows that I'm one chapter ahead of the students here as a substitute teacher. So yeah, it was arguably the most shaping of my, the most shaping career sort of season foundationally on my life, period.
Wow. How?
Well, one, I learned work ethic in a for-profit, high-end guest ranch with customers and clients, families who came there and expected a world-class experience. This was not Christian camp. This is like best in class, the top guest ranch in North America, which happened to have a staff that most of which were believers. And there was an underlying current of ministry, but that was not on the website. So standard of excellence, best in class work ethic. Second thing is I was discipled as part of the staff, and as somebody who was there full time, I got discipled by the founder of Lost Valley, Bob Foster, who for multiple years, every Friday we met for breakfast and we would do scripture memory together. And he shaped me with this ability to be a head wrangler and have a hospitality best of class, best standard of excellence, while also like operating with the scriptures and being able to navigate being a follower of Jesus with utmost sense of passion and excellence. So in my early 20s, I figured out I've got to carry both of those. I can't choose one or the other. It's both. I have to be incredibly, passionate about this job I'm doing. And we have a standard of excellence. We have clients coming in who expect world-class experiences, while also I'm now in my early 20s. I want to I want to have this foundation that's going to carry me for the next 60 years as a follower of Jesus. So and then when you combine the fact that you're in this you're in an isolated space with about 50 staff that now you've got to figure out how to do life with, and how to sort of navigate being in your early 20s and living in community. That was a whole nother piece that was incredibly shaping. So all those things in the season I was in my early 20s, really just it was foundational. It's like the scaffolding. It's the rebar. It's the concrete that got poured 100 feet below the skyscraper. And I didn't know. I didn't know that I would need that to be able to perhaps carry some things that were going to happen for me, 20 years later.
What are some of the key lessons you pulled from that season of your life? Some of the cornerstones you built the next 25 years on?
Well, the big one was that when you host people well, when you live out hospitality, and that was like Lost Valley. The branding was actually the brand Lost Valley. The subline, or sort of the phrase, the tagline of Lost Valley was the brand of Western hospitality. So I learned what it looked like to host people well.
You're the Ritz-Carlton of the West.
You got it. Yes. Yeah, we're the Ritz-Carlton with Wranglers on.
Uh-huh.
And people, these are the kind of folks that showed up with an expectation. So to be able to deliver and then over deliver on that expectation, and how you treated people. And here's the thing. All of those lessons are still true today for me. Of remember people's names, take care of their kids, honor people who have returned. So return guests were a big part of that. And, we had a phrase, turn guests into friends and friends into family. And so when somebody showed up as a guest the first time they were there, we wanted by the end of the week for them to feel like they were family. And then when they came back the next year, or the next year, or the next year after that, they really did feel like family. And I'm hosting people in this, and here's the thing: it's really easy to create a great experience for people when they're on vacation, because their expectations are that they're going to have a great experience. So here's another one I learned, which from a connector side, this has been huge for me, which is I had to take people out on a horse for 2 hours. So, and these are people who are CEOs. They're, they operate in high places. And here I am, some knucklehead 22 or 23-year-old. I better figure out how to connect in their world. So I'm now on a horse and on horseback with, the CEO of some $50 billion company. And I did my homework on each guest. So I knew coming in that this, let's talk about the father of that family who's bringing their kids and their family to this place out in the middle of the mountains. He's expecting me to be some cowboy that can't have any volley back and forth with him in regards to his world. And then at 23, I say, well, I understand, Mr. Coleman. It's so good to have you here, by the way, at Lost Valley. Hope your horse is okay. We're out on the first ride of the week on Monday morning. By the way, I understand, you're the CEO of this company. How are things going? I noticed recently, you had your quarterly conference call, and looked like the stock was up, went from 31 to 35. And he's like, who are you? Who are you? I was expecting to have to talk about horses and, ranching. And here you are moving into my world. And this is so important for anybody is, man, if I do the homework on somebody, and I'm curious and I'm honoring of them by understanding the world they operate in, and I start there, then I've created equity every single time.
This goes back to something you've taught me: be interested, not interesting. Because the temptation is to talk about yourself. Well, here I am, blah, 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 blah. Be interested, not interesting. But there was a journey to head wrangler. You don't start there. Did it not start by shoveling manure, cleaning out the stalls?
It started.
Literally.
It started and finished there.
Oh, it did.
Oh my gosh, Carey. I didn't quit shoveling. I didn't quit scooping poop when I became the guy in charge. I mean, it was on the job description of all of us. And that's a phrase and a story I tell quite a bit. Just going back to faithful and fruitful. Are you going to be faithful in this season? And that sense of, even for me, even if I was head wrangler, I was still sort of 25 and scooping poop for a living. It felt like a lot of the time. And am I willing to? This is true for any leader, any any person at any season of their life, are you willing to crush the current assignment? Are you willing to show up and scoop the poop like it's your first day, like you just got there? Even if you are the head wrangler and you're in charge, and that and the power for us at Lost Valley, I think this is transferable. The power for us at Lost Valley with this idea of best in the world. And when we're scooping poop, we're not just cleaning up. We're making space and we're creating a runway of cleanliness that will allow a guest to have an amazing experience, which will hopefully then lead them to a place of introspection or of conversation or connection with creation that then allows us to have conversations with them about what matters most. That's the why part. It's not just so, we were so passionate about cleanliness because we never wanted there to be any barrier for any guest ever to be able to sort of like find something that could be an excuse that gets in the way of their experience. And that's, man, it's such a powerful thing when you start to connect those things that can be so boring, the faithful parts of your job that now have this connection to a bigger purpose. And the other thing is we always kidded, listen, if Jesus returns and we're all falling face down, I don't want to fall face down into a recent dropping from a horse. So let's make sure it's clean around us. Yeah.
For those of us who have never been a head wrangler or even on a ranch like me, what does a head wrangler do? What's the thumbnail job description?
Well, at Lost Valley, it was a bit different, because when I was there, I was head wrangler. I was really the ranch foreman, which meant we had almost 200 head of cattle, which was part of it was part of the operation of being a working guest ranch. Now, some of that was just for the brochure, let's be honest. But there was about 150 horses. So as a head wrangler, your job is to manage the horse operation. Your job is to basically be in charge of the guest experience when it comes to riding. And Lost Valley, when I was there, and it's still true today, it is the best ranch in North America to have the best riding experience possible. Most ranches anymore, you can't even do anything other than walk if you want to go out on, and you're actually like pretty good at riding. You have to be in a controlled environment, but still at Lost Valley, like you go out and, we would test people. We made sure people could ride well, but once we knew that they could ride well, then, there was a lot of fun that would happen on a horse over the course of 7 days. And it's still to this day, it's like, that's the draw. The reason people go to Lost Valley is for horseback riding. So yeah, I was in charge of, and then there was usually a staff of 12 people, 8 to 12 people, depending on the season, who were also wranglers. And that's the part I didn't do really well. If you ask any of the guys who were on my crews over the years, and this is a theme. It's a theme, unfortunately, which is when I'm carrying more weight than I should, the crew in that case was not necessarily getting the best of me. The guests loved me. But the crew sometimes, I would get too tense. Because I didn't want to fail. And so looking back, I had such the opportunity to invest in, over the course of 5 years, 100, give or take, different young, early 20s. And I did okay at that, but I wasn't great at it.
Yeah. Well, as you say, you mentioned older leaders before younger leaders, but I heard Jerry Seinfeld say recently in an interview, was like, you really want a great last quarter. Like your whole life is setting you up for that last quarter. Another thing I found out very recently, do you know how old Tim Keller was before he published his first book?
No.
I did not know. 57.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Isn't that crazy? So for older leaders listening, now we get the, wisdom does come in your 40s, I think. And then you're like, I was such a doofus, but you hopefully can make amends for the future. What were the bread trails to John Maxwell? Because you ended up working at John Maxwell and then it was Catalyst. So did that come out of Lost Valley, or how did that connection happen?
Yeah, there was a couple of guys I met while at Lost Valley who I had. Steve Grays and Tom Addington, shout out. Cornerstone Group was the name of this management consulting company. And they did some work for Lost Valley on transition and succession because it was family owned. And when I was there on the team, I met these guys, and they were sort of the first men that were like really good at like business. And they were both doctors and they were professors, but they were also like Bible teachers and teaching pastors, and they carried the scriptures in one hand and Wall Street Journal in the other, and with again equal sense of excellence. And I just told them, I was 24 and I was still at Lost Valley, and I said, hey, like I really like you guys. I don't even know what you do, but is there any, whenever I leave here, I want to call you. I'd love to just know more about what you do. And they, I think they kind of thought that was cute, sort of, oh, that's nice. You're a cowboy. What would you know about management consulting? But I talked them into it in essence. And so they were in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I joined them for a couple of years and worked with them. And one of our clients was Enjoy, which was John's company. And so, I got connected to Enjoy because they were a client of this management consulting group that I was working with post Lost Valley. So there was a little season there of a few years that I spent with that group, and then got connected to John and started helping. I actually wrote the business plan for Catalyst, there was a plan in place, but I did a lot of the market research early on. And so I wasn't on the team at that point. I was part of the team, but I wasn't like full time, and ended up joining the team shortly after that. And so, when people say Brad's the founder of Catalyst, it's not really true. Like really, Gabe Lyons, John Maxwell would, way more be the founders. And Gabe stood on the stage and hosted the event for the first several years. And John was the funder of the event.
So last question for you today. And I think you've earned around 12 or whatever it is, because we answered one question I had prepared. So congratulations, Brad. That was really good.
Listen, I've never talked about Lost Valley as much as I just talked about it. So thank you or about my early, elementary years.
Well,
so
it's fascinating.
Thank you for going places that nobody else typically asks about.
We've been friends for over 10 years, and it's like peeling an onion. You just learn more about something. So you mentioned success, failure of failure, or fear of failure, motivated by success. I want to know how you define success, because you're not flashy. You don't drive a flashy car. You don't have an expensive house. You wear normal clothes. You don't have a lot of bling. There's no bling to Brad. Did you know that, Brad? Yeah. There's none.
There's blink, but not bling.
Blink, but no bling. That's it. What is success to you?
It's a great question. I think success, well, personally, I would say, the ultimate expression personally of success is becoming more like Jesus. So I know that's a cookie cutter answer, but it really is true. When I think about vocational success, I would say, the more people I help be successful, but also the more people I connect into the slipstream. And my slipstream is my success factor, truly. So when I start thinking about the concentric circle of influence and the hundreds, or hopefully for me thousands of leaders that I am connected to, that I'm always trying to add value to, the more of those that get put into that circle, that's success to me. because I know once they get into the circle, there's going to be value added. So ultimately, to put a phrase on it, I would borrow this from John Maxwell. If I'm adding value to people, I'm winning. So, to the question of what success looks like, I think it's adding value. If I'm investing in people, helping them win, then I win.
Wow. You know what occurred to me, just having interviewed Kevin Kelly, who you introduced me to a couple of years ago. He's got that saying. I don't know that you've read his latest book. It's amazing. Just what is it? Excellent Advice for Living or something like that. But it's way better than the title. He says, "Don't be the best, be the only."
Yes,
I think you've done that. Like, who else is Brad Lomenick? Nobody. And you're the only one who does what you do at that level. And I think we just spent an hour unpacking why that is. And I hope that leaders listening right now can say, okay, I'm 19 years old. What was I doing in the equivalent of Mrs. Weaver's class or my sophomore year? Or, because I look back on it and the clues were there in my life too. I was the kid drawn toward communication, drawn toward politics and higher levels of thinking. You were drawn to, I know the name of every kid in my class on day one, and now day two, I go back and I try to figure out, wow, she loves to trade lunches, and he loves to do X, and he loves to do Y, and all that stuff. And, here you are all these years later doing that. So, incredible. And I think there's been a really profitable hour and a bit spent together.
Well, thank you, Carey. And, I'll say this because people ask me, like, was there anybody that you saw, that you've seen over the last 25 years that was a picture for you of what you didn't know would be true that has become true? And Peb Jackson, who I don't know if you ever met. Peb died last year, and we just celebrated Peb a year later from him going to be with Jesus. Just last month in May, we celebrated a year later, and 200 people showed up to a year later celebration of Peb Jackson. And the thing that I learned most from Peb, and it's I want to pass this on to people because I think it's really helpful, is when it's what you just said about Kevin Kelly, and don't just be the only. And the thing about Peb, so many people would always say is I don't really know what he does. And in my, as a 20-something, I was like, shouldn't we have like a career or something we're doing that's really simple and explainable? And to your point about Kevin, like, actually, I don't think that's necessarily the point. I think the point is, as Kevin says, is if you even have a hard time or explaining what you do to your parents or to your family, you might have actually found the thing that you most should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's not a category for it.
There's not a category. And I hope you and I both are good expressions of this for your audience of thousands of leaders, that it's okay to go pursue the thing that other people don't necessarily understand. And they look at you and go, well, good luck with that. Because I think you and I have both found that sweet spot.
Yeah, my mind's going back to a conversation I had with a sweet woman who used to attend the church that I led. She's like, so what are you doing now exactly? And I'm like, well, I'm doing some things. She said, I heard you have a podcast. I'm like, yeah, I have a podcast. And she goes, yeah, how does that work? Is it? And I'm like, yeah, we have some listeners. It's okay, but it's like, it's kind of fun when even at a family gathering or people you don't see that often, and they're like, so what are you up to? And you're like, well, it's kind of like this, and it's like this, and it's like this. But I love it. I get up every day, and it's like, how do I get to do this? And hopefully this has encouraged some listeners to move a little beyond the job description, maybe to rethink the job description. Maybe the better job is not to leave the organization, but to bring your whole self to the organization and do what only you can do, because you'd be adding so much value there. And I think in the age of AI, when all the easy tasks are going to be easily replicatable by machine learning and AI and, AGI, et cetera, well, they're probably not going to connect like Brad can. And conversations like this, ChatGPT still got a little bit catching up to do. So
I'll finish with this. I had a guy recently, Zane Callister, shout out, which, by the way, you hear me keep saying shout out because I do this on my podcast.
Oh, you do it all the time. And we do it now at staff meeting. It's like shout out. And I feel like we owe you $1 every time. It's like shout out TM. Shout out TM.
I stole it from Tony Kornheiser on Pardon the Interruption on ESPN.
There you go.
So, but Zane Callister, who is a good friend, and he left me this long voice memo, and he said, I figured out what it is you do. And he said, you're air traffic control. You're the tower. You're the tower at an airport, and like which planes need to land, which planes need to take off, which planes need to stay in the air a little bit longer. You're air traffic control of leaders, and you're staying connected to all these different people all over the world, which allows you to then play the role of appropriately, intentionally, like knowing where the planes are and knowing when they need to land and when they need to take off. And it gave me like so much lift just to have that picture of, that's really, really helpful when it comes to explaining sort of, the connector in me. So I'll just leave people with that. Yeah.
Brad, thank you so much. H3 Leadership Podcast, which I also listen to, part of the Art of Leadership Network. Any other channels you're showing up at these days?
That's the most, I think, helpful and value adding one. So I would say, start there, H3 Leadership Podcast. And, I don't need to give anybody else any other URLs or other outlets.
Okay, man. Brad, thanks so much, buddy. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Carey.